All right, welcome everyone to our webinar, People, Processes, and Tech, Empowering Companies for Rapid and Secure Growth, a conversation with Mercury and Netography. I'm Jennifer Leggio, Chief Marketing Officer at Netography, and I will be your host for the event. In a moment, I'll introduce our speakers who you can see on your screen, but first, a couple housekeeping items. All participants other than the speakers will be muted for the duration of the event. But we do welcome questions, and there will be a Q&A at the end of the webinar, which total talk time should be about 30 minutes. Enter your questions as we go into the chat, and we'll answer as many as possible toward the end. Now, I don't want to waste any more time, so we'll introduce our speakers. First, I'd like to welcome and thank Branden Wagner, Senior Information Security Manager at Mercury, and of course, Martin Roesch, CEO of Netography. Thank you so much both for being here. I'll let you two kick off this conversation, but let's start with why we're here and why this topic is important. But Branden, why don't we go ahead and start with you? And we'll let you guys do this.
So hi, I'm Branden. Talking about network activity and monitoring is always an important topic, especially when you're a cloud-based fintech company like Mercury. And so it was great that we could partner with Netography here to talk about not only our security, but security in general and in the cloud and looking at network activity.
All right, I'm Roesch. I'm the CEO at Netography, and I'm excited to talk to Branden today about how we've kind of made each other's lives easier with the services that Mercury offers that Netography's been taking advantage of, as well as how we've been able to help Mercury provide their services to customers securely. All right, so why don't we dive right into it? Branden, why don't you tell people a little bit about the makeup of your company and kind of how the fit for Netography kind of really, like how we got on your radar and how you found us to be when you started digging into it.
Yeah, so Mercury, right? We're a cloud-first company. Entirely, all of our infrastructure is in the cloud. I'd say 99% of our employees are remote, which means we're all over the country. I was sitting in an FS-ISAC working group, and there was lots of questions about monitoring network activity, how it should be done, full TLS inspection, packet decryption, all that kind of stuff. And people didn't really understand what to do with that or why they needed it. And so we started looking around for different vendors, what our options were. It was just very interesting to see that like everybody was doing TLS inspection, but they were ignoring things like the metadata. And so that's kind of how Netography ended up on our radar. Being that we are a very diverse network, like I said, endpoints all over the country, connections coming from all over the world, being able to get the metadata was just as important as the packet capture itself. And you could get pretty good insights, excellent insights, without ever actually doing any kind of packet decryption. And so that's how we got on the place with flow monitoring with Netography.
Very cool. Yeah, it's it's interesting. So for those of you who are on the webinar who don't know my background or maybe aren't as familiar with it, I got my start doing deep packet inspection technology. So I came from the packet-based side of the world, building technologies like Snort, and obviously that turned into SourceFire and things like that. So I have walked that road a lot, and it definitely started to occur to me really a long time ago, like more than 10 years ago, that with kind of the pervasive and growing use of encryption on networks, not to mention the fact that they're dispersing across multi-cloud environments and with dispersed enterprises and things like that, doing the kind of packet analysis game that we used to do, if you, like one of the things that you got to do when kind of it's your job to look ahead 5 or 10 years is figure out, okay, well, if these trends continue, where do we end up, right? So I looked at it a long time ago and I thought, metadata analytics platform is probably the right way to go as we march down this technology road, because it's just not going to be an approach, the way that we have done with deep packet inspection is just not going to be an approach that works very well. So for us, as I came to join the team at Netography that was building essentially this concept around metadata analytics in real time by being able to leverage flow data and things like that, it got to be really interesting. And it was interesting working with Mercury because you guys are a cloud native, born in the cloud company, which, a lot of my prior history was dealing with on-prem environments and things like that. So how this technology applies to your cloud environments and what you get from it, I think is really fascinating. And I bet you people would be really interested to hear, like, for what you have done as far as deploying Netography, like what you get from it.
Yeah, so I'd say one of the immediate values that I got from it that was kind of cool. First thing is, where infrastructure is code. So everything is defined in code somewhere, mostly in Terraform. And so, the rules are defined. What network activity should be where, it's defined there. But being able to visualize it and actually understand what devices are actually talking is different than looking at the code. So, immediately getting flow logs into Netography and being able to visualize, like, this server over here is talking to that database, and these workers over here are talking to this backend, and just kind of be able to get that whole landscape of what activity was where was pretty awesome. And I took, myself using your kind of flow maps there, rearranged some of those to, like, fit, and I overlaid our actual network infrastructure diagram right on top of that. And I was able to, like, take it back to my infrastructure team and be like, what is that dot, right? That's not on any of our graphs. Like, why is it talking? And it was just, in that case, it ended up being like a mislabeled host, but still, being able to visualize that kind of infrastructure there was like an immediate impact to show people, like, where things are talking and why. Another thing, right? So it is all in the cloud. We had a VPN issue where somebody had been attempting to brute force us. We didn't see any of it from any of our infrastructure logs because it was never actually getting anywhere. But it was nice to see that Netography found it in their NetFlow monitoring. It was just something that was, very slow, very quiet, happening over, months. Somebody was hitting us, right? Something that would never pop up in our logs, but Netography was able to surface that pretty quickly, and we just blocked that particular entity. So there was lots of, like, little immediate values that we could see from just being able to visualize our data instead of just pouring through the logs like we had previously done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting, so obviously my background in intrusion detection, it was always like a real eye-opener when people would implement for the first time and really start seeing what they could see. A lot of times, in the old days especially, it was still, web-based spreadsheets and stuff like that. It's still looking through logs and grepping and things like of that nature. But as we started to build more visualization tools, it got more interesting because all of a sudden you could see things that you could never see before. And the cool thing to me about this approach to doing it is that all of a sudden, instead of having very discrete points on your network where you're instrumented so that you can see what's going on through, basically a drinking straw, all of a sudden this approach is like we light up the entire network and we can see everything. Anything you care to see is easy to see. So yeah, I think it's fascinating, like the insights that you get, like, what is this thing that doesn't show up on any of our network maps, right? I talk about this with some of our investors sometimes when they're talking about, so, talk to me, like, what about the differentiation and, the kind of insights that you're generating, things like that. And there's the basic kind of threat detection, compromise detection, threat hunting sort of things that you can do with the platform that it was natively built for, but it's a very broad approach to the problem. So there's a variety of other things that you can do with it as well. And from my standpoint, being able to do something like drag a network map together by using the visualization tools that are in there and then compare it against your actual map and say, what is that? There's really, apart from like grinding through logs or looking for a low and slow brute forcer and things like that, apart from grinding through logs and like really having the wherewithal to do that, like having it just pop out to you, like, what is that? Why is that there? Like the difference between how you think you're configured and what's actually happening is pretty substantial in a lot of places. And I think it's really fascinating when you see it deployed, kind of in an operational environment that is of a high value environment as well, how, people can just start surfacing things that are like, this isn't what I thought it was. So talk to me a little bit about the deployment. So we make a lot of hay around our frictionless model, right? So we're a pure SaaS product. We're born in the cloud too. So unlike the old days, there's nothing that you necessarily have to deploy. So we can see in a multi-cloud environment, we can see on-prem environment if you have one, which you guys don't, and we can synthesize a picture of all of it. So can you talk a little bit about where the rubber hit the road when you actually deployed the technology?
Yeah, so that's actually really great, and that was one of the reasons that like really solidified the relationship with Netography. When we first implemented it, we were using Parquet format files, and you guys couldn't ingest them at the time. And just having a quick chat with your team about why we were using it, what we were using it for, that went away real quick. You guys suddenly supported Parquet. And so ultimately the way we architected it is, everything was going from our cloud environment to buckets, and then Netography was pulling from those buckets so that we could, quickly and easily parse. So I'd say like the whole deployment timeline was probably 15 minutes. And 14 of those minutes were making sure we had the right approvals in place to start doing things. Mm-hmm. So like actual deployment time was, 45 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, it's music to my ears, obviously, because, we talk a big game about, how easy this is and how quickly you can be up and running. But, hearing, 15 minutes and 14 of those we're talking to the lawyers is like, is really cool. Because, once again, I came from the appliance side of the world, which is like, okay, we're going to, you want to stand up our capability in your, your data center or whatever. Okay, well, we're going to ship you a bunch of boxes. And when they get there, let us know. Then we'll fly a person out there and, they'll rack it, stack it, get it all set up, powered packets. And then, then we'll plug it in, we'll get it functioning, then we'll push policies to it, we'll tune those policies, and we'll get them integrated with the management infrastructure and the reporting system set up, in mere months, you can be up and running. Whereas with Netography, for you guys, it was 15 minutes. We've had a case where we had a customer come in with an actual active attack that, they weren't a customer yet, and they asked us for help. And they went from we stood them up an account, told them where to point their data sources, and went from first flow arriving to telling them how to fix their problem, because obviously they hadn't been trained on the product in less than an hour. And coming from months to productivity to minutes to productivity is like gigantic, especially in the world of network security. Like nothing happens fast in network security, or never has before, and all of a sudden you've got this capability that really changes the kind of the operational tempo. So can you talk about, so are we covering everything in your enterprise today, or are there areas that we're not covering yet?
There's a few areas that aren't being covered today because of just architecture in general. It's on our roadmap of things to fix, but I'd say you're covering about 95%.
Yeah.
And it was great just seeing those communications, seeing what kind of activity was there, and then just tuning in general, right? So putting Netography in also helped optimize our network, because we could see, for example, SSH was a great one, where we had protocol negotiations going on, because two servers had different configurations, right? So being able to do that and kind of cut down on some of that network traffic and noise. And so it was pretty seamless to get all that done. It was great, informative, actionable data. And yeah, we're planning on getting it to 100% of all network activity as we continue to roll things out.
Yeah, and I, personally, I'd be interested to hear feedback as you get those parts of the network lit up, how fast you can do it. One of the things that I like to promote when I'm talking about it is that if you're not deployed 100% across your enterprise because of cost factors or complexity factors or whatever, all the social factors that are involved in deploying technology. If all of a sudden you decide you need to stand it up very quickly someplace else, and it architecturally is supported, like you can generate the data that we need. It's once again a matter of minutes. Typically, the actual like onboarding from we're going to type the configuration lines into the infrastructure to having data populating the system and then being able to show it and work with it and mine it and write policy around it is something that doesn't take very long at all. In that case that you bring up about the SSH, seeing negotiations go on, there's an interesting security use case there. Like it's almost like a governance use case, right? Because you can have, protocol downgrade attacks. Essentially, if you can get something to negotiate it down, and then you can have an attacker who can see into transactions theoretically.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly how it ended up being used as a governance use case. Like, why is this server configured with these? Why is that one configured differently? Why don't we standardize it? Which ultimately we did, right? And now it's part of our standard Terraform config. And so it just goes seamlessly across the network. And now we literally get alerts from Netography when something is different, which is great.
Oh, that's super. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly, that's the goal, have the system into a form where it essentially you can define what normal and abnormal looks like, and it just automatically lets you know when it's seeing it going on, which is once again comparing and contrast to the old way of doing things. Instead of writing tens of thousands of signatures or running machine learning models that are just simply pointing out port scans and things like that, having it where you can define the interrelationships between the entities in your organization and then write policy around that. And that's all driven by the context layer in the platform. So are you guys pretty integrated with the context capabilities of the platform today?
Yeah, that was great when you guys rolled that out. So, right, we were a customer before the context labels were there. And so one of our biggest comments when we first rolled it out was being able to get traffic from things like GitHub, right? Going from GitHub to AWS, there's a ton of traffic there. As we're recompiling, bringing new features in, all that kind of stuff, tons of data, tons of net flow is there, and that originally wasn't easily seen, right? We were grouping IP addresses, adding our own kind of context there, but then you guys implemented that context labeling feature, and it immediately just cleared up tons of information and brought extreme visibility to certain things. So we could see what data was Snowflake, what data was GitHub. And we didn't have to go through and let's go check that IP address, find out it belongs to Microsoft, and then infer that it goes to GitHub. So that was great. And then ingesting things from AWS, right? Being able to get things like the host names of these EC2 instances, because a lot of these hosts are ephemeral. And so DNS didn't necessarily match up with the host because it's behind a load balancer. And so the actual name that was, the server itself versus what was public facing was very, very different. And being able to put those context clues together to kind of help with that ephemeral environment was super awesome.
That's cool. So are you guys running context-based policy now in the system?
Yeah. So there's some improvement there, but there are certain contexts that talk about what should be talking and when, and firing off some alerts. There's some other things. So one of the things that we ended up doing with you guys is integrating with our SIM tool. So forwarding alerts from Netography off to our SIM Panther, and then being able to aggregate that data to provide better context there, rather than taking action directly in Netography.
Very cool. And we recently did the Panther integration as well, correct?
Yeah. I think we were the ones bugging you to make that happen.
No, as an aside, from what I hear from the engineering team, Panther's pretty cool. So I'm a CEO now, so I just do PowerPoint and spreadsheets. But I've heard from my team that Panther's really cool to work with.
Yeah, it's a fantastic platform. I could talk about writing detection as code, but that's not why we're here.
No, for sure. Well, very cool. So how about, have you guys done much customization of the interfaces for your system?
Yeah, we've done a little bit there. One of the great things about it was, just actually working with your team, right? So we've got, I think it's a bi-weekly meeting with your team to help us do some of that. And it's been great to give us the data that we need, the dashboards that we need. We were dealing with an auditor who was asking questions about where traffic was coming from and what countries it was originating from. We could have spent the time to figure it out in the platform ourselves. It's actually fairly intuitive, but we sent off an email, and by the time we had our next meeting, your team had already built the dashboard for us, and that satisfied literally all of the auditor's questions. That, or they were so impressed that we did that so quickly they didn't ask any more questions, not really sure which, but that dashboard has actually been very useful in just pointing out like where traffic is coming from. And yeah, overall, like the customization has been pretty interesting. Like I said earlier, right, one of the things we did was using those flow maps or the network topology maps, kind of just map that to my infrastructure maps, right? And so customizing some of that, just rearranging it, how those graphs looked, that's been great. And just like you guys have incrementally added new features to that, like color coding over time. That's kind of really helped understand the network topology.
Yeah. So from our standpoint, one of the cool things about the product is kind of composability of the interface. So being able to build custom dashboards is not something that just we do, but anybody can. If you lift the hood, you can basically set up any custom dashboard you want, and you can compose how you want the data presented to you. So for a lot of demos or customer demos and things like that, we set up, we were working with a media company a couple weeks ago and set up a demo that had like Netography studios, and it was like production company over here and mobile news trucks over there and so on and so forth, and showed them kind of imagine, if you will, how this would look with your data. So the ability to shift from the defaults to any view that you need, we think is really useful and powerful. I have worked for many a company that thought UIs were essentially web-based spreadsheets with some buttons to say block this attacker. So I think that's a really interesting thing that you don't see very often from a lot of products, especially that are doing kind of this high-speed real-time analysis like you're getting out of this platform. So have you, so apart from shipping data off to Panther, have you worked with any of the other integrations that we have for outbound?
Yeah, actually, so the flexibility of your response engine, it's not called that, response policies, there we go, has actually been really great. We've got a couple of different ones there for certain things that like immediately send a notification off to Slack. For example, no flow. Anytime we see no flow at all for a web-based company that's running 24/7, it's usually a pretty big indicator that something is wrong, right? So that immediately gets fired off in Slack, which people start looking around trying to figure out why there's no activity at all. And usually we find that something went wrong somewhere. So that's a great one. We have a couple that go off for emails for more like logging purposes. For like frequency analysis. But yeah, it's been great to just play with those response policies. We've had a couple here and there that just do random things because we just wanted to play. But the flexibility of those response policies has been really awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. So have you, and this question's a bit of a flyer, so I don't expect much from your answer. Have you guys actually experimented with the APIs at all, trying to do anything with them?
Not yet. It's on our list. We don't have a real API purpose yet. We think it's cool. We think it's something that we can probably play with. We've thought about, some of those threat models, right, where we get an alert from Netography, and what will we do with it, right? How would we tune that to take some sort of action, and vice versa. If we could, maybe take an AWS instance, EC2 instance, right, and have it send something to Netography, and then Netography back to some firewall configuration or something to block. So we've thought about those, but we haven't implemented anything yet.
Yeah. So we just have you looked at the we just put readme.io into the product to support our API documentation, stuff like that. So the documentation is actually radically stepping up every day to be able to work with those things. So hopefully by the time you guys get to play with it, it'll be interesting because there's things like code snippets in there and things like that to aid your journey with the technology. But once again, so when you're using Netography, like the user experience that you get through using the portal, so our web gateway, what that's doing actually is exercising the API in the background. So essentially anything you can do through the portal, you can actually script to the APIs as well. So we've had customers who have done their onboarding via the APIs. So instead of onboarding dozens of devices, they script it through the API. And there's integrations. We have both context integrations, sending context into the platform, as well as response integrations, sending responses out of the platform that can be done through all of that. So it's really, it's pretty cool because it's all native to it. When customers ask us to extend the platform in kind of interesting directions, it's usually not a super huge lift. It's a time thing, but it's not like, we have to re-architect that. Everything's architected to be very scriptable.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I will definitely take a look at that README. I didn't know that you guys had published that, so I will definitely be interested in that.
Cool. So what can I tell you about our Mercury journey?
Yeah. So how'd you end up with Mercury?
Well, children, gather around the campfire. Let me tell you a story about a little company called Silicon Valley Bank. We, when the Silicon Valley Bank thing blew up back a couple of months ago, we were pretty plugged into what was, or at least had like an inkling that something was up on kind of, for the people who were affected by it. You'll remember, like, there started to be some grumbling on Wednesday, and then Thursday the wheels really started to come off. Then on Friday it was just chaos, and the FDIC came and shut down the bank. And at Netography, we were, as the CEO, I was mildly interested in what was going on Wednesday, somewhat concerned on Thursday morning. And by Thursday afternoon, I was like, okay, we got a problem here, and we've got to do something about it. Because, long story short, all of our cash was at Silicon Valley Bank. So as I was talking to my team, it came up that we didn't have any other commercial banking relationships that we could move the money off to. And, Marty's personal account is not a suitable receptacle for all of our venture capital. It would, in fact, my lawyers assured me, violate a bunch of things with our investor agreements and stuff like that. So please don't do that. So I had seen in some of the channels that I was paying attention to, several CEOs from other early stage startups were saying, we've got a relationship with Mercury and they're great to work with. So as I was talking to my team, I was like, Mercury's a customer of ours, and, I'm hearing great things about them. So, if we're going to take on another commercial banking relationship, so we have someplace to move money to, on the off chance that we should actually be able to move money anywhere out of Silicon Valley Bank, why don't we give them a call and see what we can figure out. So we did. And one of the big hurdles that you have to do when you're standing up a new banking relationship is this know your customer thing, where essentially they have to make sure you're not like a terrorist organization or something like that, that they're banking by accident. But luckily, because we already had a pre-existing relationship with the bank as a vendor to the bank, those relationships were already established. So we were essentially able to get through the know your customer thing in a few hours. And there's some hilarious stories about me trying to get a picture of my driver's license from my seat on a United Airlines flight headed west to the ground through some terrible satellite airplane Wi-Fi connection to wrap up my side of it, because it turns out when you do these things, the CEO actually has to get personally involved with their personal information. But we got all that resolved, and we went from we should talk to Mercury to having an account with Mercury in probably about 4 or 5 hours. And then from that point on, we weren't able to move money on the Friday. Obviously, FDIC came in and shut them down, and they weren't servicing wires and things like that. But as soon as things opened up on the following Monday, when FDIC said all your deposits will be whole and so on and so forth, we moved all of our money over. And the cool thing from my standpoint is we've got an app on the phone. Now I have other bank banking apps on my phone, but this one was like a real modern, phone experience, smartphone experience. It's like, you just moved $20 million. You just did this, and now I get notifications when, people are using corporate cards and stuff like that. So it's like, your VP of finance just bought dinner for somebody, and here's at the Chick-fil-A or whatever. So it was really cool because all of a sudden it's like I feel like I'm using like a modern app, and I can actually see what's going on, and I don't have to wait for my monthly reporting to come out necessarily, and I can see transactions as they're occurring. And we're a startup, so cost control is actually a big deal for us, and managing how we spend our money is a big deal for us. So being able to see it and get reporting on it very quickly and essentially in real time is really awesome. So the bank's been really great to work with for us, and being able to stand up the relationship very quickly and start transacting as soon as we were able to has been great. So and also the team's been really good to work with. I talked about some financial instruments that we had in our old relationship with you, and same day and had contact from the bank saying, hey, can we help you? So yeah, from if you are looking for a bank for your for your startup, your tech company, or any other organization, especially given that Mercury has an instrument essentially that allows you to keep way more money at the bank insured than you would get from a standard bank account. I totally enjoy working with you guys and the relationship that we've been able to forge here. Oh, I lost you. I can't hear you.
Cool. Sorry about that. How about now? Mute buttons. You'd think
Yeah.
I'd know by now. No, and that's great. That's exactly what we wanted, was that modern platform that makes banking easier. Transaction monitoring, just like net flow monitoring, you want to be able to see what's going on in real time. If you can't see it, you don't understand it, you can't fix it, you can't protect it.
Yeah.
Whether that's your finances or your network data, it's all the same.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the how you guys are using things like Netography to improve the offerings, or at least illustrate how you're doing security at the bank to potential customers, and how that's like a selling point for you.
Yeah, I mean, right, we are cloud-based, right? So we're everywhere, and we're nowhere, and being able to understand where everything is, what kind of communications are happening in our network is extremely important. Whether you're talking to a Snowflake instance or a Postgres database, or just server-to-server communications, or even reaching out to partner banks, right? All of that communication has to happen for money to flow. And so we want to make sure that we're monitoring that. So Netography is just one piece of our defense in-depth network to understand everything that's going on in our environment. And it captures that net flow data, but we've also got all of our audit logs from all of our servers, and being able to piece all of those things together between various tools helps tell that whole story of what happened with your network, what happened with this bank talking to that bank, or this customer performing this transaction. We want to be able to tell that story and play back that audit log, just like you would with your finances. You want to know where that money went, who spent it, and why. We want to know what communications happened in our network and where it's going.
Very cool. Awesome. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Are there any questions? Jen, you're muted.
Questions. Thank you guys both. That's really helpful so far. One of the questions I wanted to throw in to touch on that we had promoted out as part of the webinar is, Branden, when we were preparing for this, you talked a lot about the customer experience being really critical for the company, for your type of company, and in making a choice with a vendor. Can you tell us a little bit about how that was with Netography from start to now?
Yeah, that's a great thing to touch on, right? So it really is about building together. Both of us are startups, and we're trying to get our goals accomplished. And I'd reached out to quite a few different vendors and tried to explain what it is that I'm trying to do and what it is that I want, right? And Netography was, the only one out of the vendors that we had talked to that was willing to, spend the time to help us understand what it is that we're trying to do, how to get there, what it's going to take. And we have, like I said earlier, we've got like a bi-weekly meeting with Netography support to talk about where we're going, what's the next step, what tuning can we do. And so that's really important to us and my team, that like every time we bring on a new vendor, that there is a partnership there of building and iterating over what we have today. We don't want to just put a vendor in and wipe our hands clean and be like, okay, well, we've got a tool, so now we're secure. It's a constant evolving game, and Netography has been a great partner in that.
Great, thank you. I have another one for you here. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. One is, you talked about the conversation you had with the FSI Stack Working Group and the recommendations that you had made. Did you, Netography, we're a startup, we're a young startup, and sometimes there's additional convincing that you need to do as part of your internal buying cycle for companies to take a chance on a company of our size. Did you have to do that? If you did, what did you, what was your process and what did you have to say? And then also from an urgency perspective, if you were looking at us from the outside now, why would you say that a company like yours or someone in your role should think about us sooner than later?
Okay, so that's a couple of different questions. I'll break it down a little bit. Why sooner rather than later? Anytime you're dealing with network infrastructure, the sooner you get monitoring in place, the better off you are. It's just the fact, as complexity grows, it's going to take longer to implement in certain places. You're going to have to do some more engineering or maybe even re-engineering to get some of those pieces in place. As far as looking at vendors, right, it's a pretty standard procurement process. Anytime I try to procure any sort of vendor, it's always, who are they? Why them? Who are their competitors, right? So, it was one of the first things we do is our little write-up there for why Netography over X, Y, and Z. And, being able to just talk to, some of Marty's background there was great. Like knowing Snort. I'd previously used Snort in just about every organization I'd ever worked in some capacity, right? So knowing the quality of Snort and its history, knowing that would be integrated with the product and those concepts, right? With network metadata, that really helped. But really, the proof of concept, the trial, whatever you want to call it, where we loaded our data into the platform and started, going through it with Netography staff was what made that decision. Them being able to point out like, hey, what is this traffic? Can you understand this traffic? Because we don't understand it. And when you've got both Netography and Mercury looking at the traffic and it didn't tell a story immediately, that threw up a red flag of something we needed to look at. So we enriched that data a little bit more, able to tell that story, and then pointing out the things that they were finding, like SSH protocols or the slow and low brute force there, things that weren't even flagging in our systems. That that being able to prove those sort of things made it worth the effort.
Great, thank you. I have a question for Marty, one that you're familiar with. It goes back to obviously your history. Branden just talked about Snort. You had taken some time off after Cisco. People are wondering why Netography, and why now for you?
Well, I kind of hinted at it a little bit, I guess, earlier on in the conversation. So really, back into the old days of SourceFire and pre-Cisco, I started getting more and more concerned with the trends I was seeing in networking and security towards, what has turned into kind of zero trust plus migration to the cloud, plus the increasingly pervasive use of network encryption, and also this march towards turning the internet basically into HTTPS. And I knew what that meant for what we had done in the old days. So there's that, and at the same time, I had a real desire to try a new approach to doing network-based traffic analysis. Snort and most of what I've worked on, either hands-on keyboard writing or marker on whiteboard theorizing for the last 20 plus years, has been around looking at what's going on in networks and trying to make sense of it and give people insight into it. And one of the interesting things that I saw when the cloud-based EDR technologies first emerged in the kind of late 2000s was this idea of using some sort of metadata collector as a point of presence, and then shipping the data up to a cloud analyzer that actually does the heavy lifting, and then shipping answers back to the point of presence, essentially, for what to do based on what you're observing. So hey, this is malware, don't run it, or shut it down, or delete it, or whatever. And I was really fascinated because you didn't have to have definitions files that you moved around, and you didn't have to have this giant corpus of detection logic that the customer needed to be familiar with and things like that to make it work. You could do it all very transparently in the cloud backend. And I thought, well, how, if you wanted to do that, but you wanted to do it on a network and be able to do it in real time, how would you do it? And the answer that came to me way back when was, well, you'd have to do a metadata-based approach. And the only network-based metadata technology that's out there is built around flow. And if you take, context and add it together with flow, you start doing, instead of doing packet analysis to figure out what's going on in a network environment, you can do metadata analysis to figure out what's going on. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to do it if you get to 99+% encryption of everything, especially as the encryption gets better and better. And it also can deal with the fact that networks are becoming increasingly dispersed. We talk about at Netography how they're dispersed, ephemeral, encrypted, and diverse. Well, that dispersed and ephemeral trend is something that's been accelerating post-pandemic, with everybody working from home and just get your job done as the kind of the marching orders when people got sent home in March 2020. That meant that these corporate networks just kind of dispersed to the four winds overnight, and like your ability to get your hands around that is really difficult. So I saw all these kind of things in motion, and then I started advising actually the Netography team shortly after I left Cisco in 2019. And then by 2021, I was asked if I'd be interested in being the CEO of the company. And I was like, well, yeah, because I really believe in what you're building, because I believe this is the actual, this is the path forward. I think there's still a place for deep packet inspection approaches and having very specific tools for very specific environments. But it's a smaller role than it used to be, and you need to have something that's got a broader view that can pull together the entire picture like this can. And this idea of having, we're going to grab the metadata from the points of presence that we have in the environments and ship it back to a cloud analyzer that we can make smarter for the entire world simultaneously, because I don't have to push versions of software out to appliances anymore, and I don't have to push definitions on Microsoft Tuesday and do all the other rigmarole that we used to do to curate these environments. Not to mention being able to do it in the cloud and being able to do it in real time in the cloud, because so much cloud security technology is just pulling log files back to data lakes and then trying to make sense of what's going on. And that's a very post facto motion in a lot of cases. So yeah, I saw it and they asked me to come run it. I was like, yeah, absolutely. This is great. This is cool. This is exactly what I would have built. Yeah, I think that's the thing that really kind of got me off the bench and back into the kind of the startup game, is that this is the right approach. This is, in my opinion, the only approach moving forward to being able to do this in the cloud, in the on-prem environment, in IT environments, in OT environments, and provide you with a unified, holistic approach to solving the problem. So yeah, it was exciting for me.
Great, thank you. We're getting close to time, but we do have one more question for you, Branden. It's a good one to close on. How do you foresee, let me say my own company name right. How do you foresee Netography improving your monitoring and protection as you move forward? How do you see growing with us?
I mean, you're really well integrated, right? Collecting logs from, like I said, not about 95% of our infrastructure network activity. And so as long as we continue to do that, we'll continue to scale with that. Right now, I think our latency for data is somewhere around 45 seconds, which is pretty phenomenal in a network like monitoring capability. I'm very interested, right, in like the API work. I've actually, going to message my team to go look into that when we're done here. And so, we're going to continue to scale, and we've got open lines of communication. And I think that's the biggest piece right there. As long as we're able to continue to communicate, we'll be able to continue to partner and grow.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Branden. And that wraps our webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending. You'll receive the recording of this event in the coming days. In the meantime, you can always visit netography.com for any information. And thanks again for being here. Have a great day.
Thanks, Branden.
Thank you.